Um, so good evening and a warm welcome to the fourth session of the India River Week, which is themed as Healthy Rivers, Fish and Fishers. This is being organized by the India Rivers Forum. And so far we have covered 3 webinars covering the different aspects of the river capture fisheries. Today's theme will focus mainly on the changing political economy and how it is influencing the river capture fisheries. We know that the fishing communities are highly marginalized, and in many cases, we see that they are being deprived of their traditional rights. So, in this session, we shall try to deliberate on changes in terms of fishing practices, its economy, and how these are impacting the ecology of the rivers, the fish diversity, the cultures of the fish, and their livelihoods. Um, we shall be analyzing these issues, keeping in view the larger political economy of the country, especially considering the LPG regime post in the 90s. I would now like to introduce Sebastian Matthew, who shall moderate the session with me. Sebastian is the Executive Director of International Collective in support of fish workers. He has been working on issues related to fisheries governance from an ecological and social perspective, and believes that greater coherence in conserving and managing the marine, coastal, and freshwater biodiversity can protect the livelihoods of coastal and riparian fishing communities. So, Sebastian, over to you.
Thank you, Sarita, and really appreciate this meeting being organized, India Rivers Forum, and also thank you for inviting me to be at this event. So I just wanted to share a small anecdote before we get into this program. In 1988, I was working in Indonesia, looking at the conflicts between the small-scale fishers and trawlers in Indonesia. And that was Suharto's time. I traveled to Sumatra and I discovered that the main problem of the bloody conflicts in the sea between gillnet fishers and the trawlers mainly arose because of heavy deforestation along the Rokan River in Sumatra. So how is it connected? So I was very intrigued. And then they explained to me that because of large-scale deforestation along the Rokan River, there was a huge deposit of mud in the river, which got washed down into the sea, which was a major breeding ground for shrimp. And so that breeding ground of shrimp was totally disrupted by this mud discharge from the river. So as a result, the trawlers who were earlier fishing there started moving down south. And that's where the gillnet fishers were traditionally fishing. So then they converged and that fights broke out. And so then I realized that there is a link between better forestry practices and reducing conflicts at sea. So therefore, we can see that the marine and the inland, these are not separate. These are two sides of the same coin. There is no ocean, there is no freshwater, and freshwater has to carry nutrients to the sea. And I work mainly in the marine context. And in the marine context, for our fishermen to catch fish, for our women to process fish, they need to have fairly good rainfall on land, because that's what brings the nutrients to the sea. And so therefore, all these are very much linked. So that is a point I wanted to mention as an anecdote to begin with. And secondly, I'm very also surprised. We were trying to develop the small-scale fisheries guidelines at the Food and Agriculture Organization. So our organization was actively involved in organizing pre-negotiation meetings, and we also participated in the negotiation leading to these guidelines. And in this pre-negotiation meeting, we had one in Kolkata. And that's where we discovered that the inland sector in India is totally neglected. This was, I think, in 2013 that we had this meeting. In fact, Nilkant Mishra was also there at that meeting. And so this is what led to a realization that inland sector is very much neglected. And we have been trying since then with working with people like Nilkant and Pradeep Chatterjee from Calcutta to raise the profile of inland sector. Because what is interesting from our kind of research is that it has more people dependent on inland sector for livelihood than in the marine sector. about 11 million people are dependent on the inland sector. Maybe 3 million people are dependent in the marine side. So therefore, very large number of people. But production is very low. Maybe from the rivers, they catch maybe 5 to 10% of inland fish production, which is mostly coming from aquaculture. But still, from a livelihood point of view, very large number of people. 1:10 is our estimate. For every fisher in the river, there are about 10 people dependent on him or her. And there is a very significant participation of women. And in spite of all this, the inland fishery sector is not getting enough kind of policy space. And it's often seen more as a local issue, as a subnational, state-wise issue. So we were thinking that it's very important to make it into a national issue. So we try to work with the government of India for the Union Inland Water Fishery Policy, which is yet to be finalized. So therefore, that is very important to have a national perspective on these issues, because we can't compartmentalize inland fishery issues into UP, into the Andhra Pradesh and southern states of Kerala, Tamil Nadu. So I think we need to have a more larger, coherent perspective on inland fisheries from a livelihood point of view, and that it also takes us further upstream in the policy space to see, what kind of water policy is being proposed. Do we have a share in that policy? What kind of water legislation, framework legislation is there? Therefore, very interesting to notice that the committee under Mihir Shah, where Joy was also a member, proposed certain measures which were fairly inclusive. So we were hoping that framework legislation of 2016 will become a law, because it has some space for other type of activity like inland fishing. So we are hoping that this national perspective can be sort of seen as an important priority for all stakeholders in the sector. And then within that, I think we need to talk about, the United Nations considers water as a human right. And then right to livelihood from water is also seen as part of the human right. So can we see a human rights-based approach within that framework? And then can we look at fair and equitable allocation of water, so between, say, consumptive and non-consumptive use of water. So by and large, the focus is on consumptive use. So non-consumptive use is very much on the back burner. And within non-consumptive use, maybe shipping and navigation gets greater preference over activities like fishing. And then, so therefore, we need to see how the fishing activity in the rivers can be revived. And if a certain policy space can be created, my fervent hope is that the people who don't want to fish in rivers will feel the kind of urge to come back. So therefore, we can confidently talk about intergenerational equity. I can tell a fisherman or a fisherwoman can tell their child, okay, there is future in this type of activity, rather than running away from these activities. So I think we have excellent panelists to talk about different dimensions of this issue, an overarching perspective, then from the perspective from a river, perspective from a particular state of India, which has a very large inland fisheries like Bihar. Then we have the tribal community people talking about the cooperatives, their association, their organization. So I think from various perspectives we will get, I think, a few vignettes of inland fisheries and then see how to kind of weave a fabric which can be a national in character and which can become a kind of a safety net for all those people who would like to make a living from inland fishing, and all those people who would like to see that marine and inland sectors are all connected. So we all believe in ecological approach. We believe in environmental flow being reestablished, how freshwater and marine are two sides of the same coin. And these livelihoods are all, depending on where I'm located, I can participate. I don't have to migrate. I don't have to be pushed out of my activity. So I think this larger collective hope to rekindle, I'm hoping that this series of kind of workshops they're organizing will pave the foundation. Yeah. Thank you.
I would request Dr. Mr. KJ Joy from SOPECOM to set the context of this webinar. Joy is a founding member of SOPECOM and is also part of the Water Conflict Forum. And he has more than 35 years of experience in the water sector. So Joy, over to you.
Thanks, Sarita, and thanks, Sebastian, for setting a very interesting context. So, to the today's and also overarchingly the entire series of webinars we are having on this theme of healthy rivers, fish and fishers. I think what you said is very important, because in the larger context of what is happening to not only the river but even to the lives and livelihoods of the people and things. I hope that the panelists, as well as today's session, even the last session, will take account of what you suggested, and maybe we bring out with a coherent national perspective on health of the rivers and how it is linked to fish and fishers and things. I would also request my colleague Neha to put the presentation up. As she puts it, I should admit that this whole theme, health of the rivers, fish and fishers, is rather new to SOPECOM team, because we have worked a little bit on rivers and the health of the rivers, but in terms of coming to fish and fishers, probably we have not looked at this very closely, and we should admit this. So as part of the SOPECOM team, which I'm going to present in terms of setting the overall context for today's or broadly a review type of a thing, and try to raise some of the connected issues, is more like a thinking aloud along with all of you. It's nothing very set or what I call a definite about it. It's more like our own, thinking about this, which I'm going to put it out. I should also tell you that in this journey of trying to understand this whole theme and this whole issue, we took help from people like Nachiket Kelkar, Sebastian, who is present here, and most of our panelists here today. We tried to pick their brain through discussions and other things, apart from some of the literature which we go through and things. So please treat what I'm going to present as some type of very draft or a very provisional ideas. This would be further firmed up as we go along the discussion and things, and maybe when we write up the report and things, I think some of these rich discussions will capture and fine tune what we are saying today in this next 10 minutes or so. Next one. Neha? Yeah, so basically we are talking about in this particular session of the webinar series, we are talking about the changing political economy and its relationship with the health of the rivers, as well as the impact on fish and fishers or fishing community and things. Now, when we talk about political economy, I'm not going to get into a technical definition of what is political economy, etc., but basically it is talking about the broad developmental paradigm in which all these operate, how political decisions are taken about economics, investments, production, distribution, and all that realm of economy run by the political class, and what are its impacts going to be. So that is how what I'm saying, that the whole our developmental trajectory, which has been changing after independence over, and we do find that though this change has been in a way gradual, we find that 1991 was a very watershed year in the political economy of the country, because we did change tracks. Different people describe this differently. Some people call it as LPG regime, that is liberalization, privatization, globalization. Today, in fact, in the morning when I was talking to Sebastian, he used a word called PIG, that is privatization, industrialization, and globalization. Both in a way are broadly the same. So this is a regime which was brought in by the political class, and we see its impact on almost all sectors. I mean, not only the fish and fishers or rivers and things, we see it in the water sector, we see it in the forestry sector, we see it in the other social sectors, whether it is education, whether it is a different type of thing, and impacting people directly. So that is one side of the story, and along with that, we also find a new phenomenon today, which is now we just finished the Glasgow session, climate change as an overarching reality. I think climate change has its own impact on rivers, water bodies, wetlands, and other type of thing, because that is all well debated. I don't want to get into that, but I just want to make a statement here that the political economy, what I call this LPG regime, is also in a way the type of intervention we are making, the type of political decision we are taking, what type of development we are doing, that is also exacerbating the impact of climate change. And I think this linkage we should I'm much more specifically talking now, the whole question of saying that large hydropower projects are climate mitigating. and going for the whole, this is because under the name of, carbon neutrality and other type of thing, going for, hydropower as a clean, green type of energy source. And what we are seeing unfolding in the Northeast is a clear case. I think the earlier sessions, there have been references to that. So this is something which we need to keep in mind when we are talking about the larger political economy and how this, political economy is impacting climate responses to some extent. And also globally, we just saw what happened, and within nationally also it gets played out and things. Now, because of the changing political economy, we find that there are two types of impacts we need to take into account. One is that, when we talk about this whole question of free trade, movement of capital across, without even respecting the geographical boundaries of nation states, to some extent, the free travel of capital across, the whole political economy today driven by industrialization in the country. And our Prime Minister has been talking about India being made into a 5 trillion economy in the next couple of years or something. So all these are pushing the whole development agenda in a particular direction. So which is basically, we are talking about more and more industrialized way of doing it, which has got its impact on rivers, water systems, and other ecosystem resources to some extent, privatization, commercialization, and the whole emphasis on large infrastructure. We'll come to that in a little more detail. So this, in a way, has a direct impact on the rivers, and then it impacts on the lives and livelihoods of the people. And also, I would like to bring to your attention that this, without going through the route of the rivers and the natural ecosystem, it also has a direct impacts on the fishers and the fishing communities and things. So these are two things which we'll see in this session. So I think both these axes are important. And because of this type of thing, it produces a certain type of knowledge. What is basically today embedded in neoliberalism to some extent, where market and other things are playing the more important role in the economy. There's a withdrawal of state or public expenditure from various things. And we also produce a type of a knowledge which is conducive to this type of system. It also has a certain practice and policies, laws, and institutions. So these are a set of things, I think, which impact in real world, both in terms of the direct impacts on the fishers on one side and also on the health of the rivers. In fact, some of the impacts on the health of the rivers we have already seen in the previous sessions. We talked about pollution, the first one, the whole question of fragmented rivers, increased abstraction of water, which is, I think, Sebastian tried to bring our attention to the whole question of consumptive versus non-consumptive use. More and more water getting extracted for either domestic water needs or agriculture, and the bulk of the water is for agriculture, or for now growingly for industrialization, other type of a thing. Loss of connectivity, declining aquatic biodiversity, and also the type of endemic species which we have, you find on that. And also you find there's because of this type of economic regime which we have, we also have an actual push for aquaculture, monocultural type of tendencies. Because of that, there are a whole lot of invasive exotic species coming in, which is changing the fish composition to some extent. And that has an impact on capture fisheries and things. And on the other side of the equation, when we talk about direct impact and things, we need to take into account, right? This is, I'm seriously saying, there's an aspirational changes which is taken to the rural landscape of our country, and including the fish and the fishers. And this, I think, we need to take into account that there is a change because of certain reasons. People have, over changing this. We also see that there is a whole lot of loss of riparian rights because of the type of particular economic regime which we are bringing in. Resulting in shift from traditional livelihoods to other livelihood options. There are tenurial changes which is taking place. At the end, we find that there is a whole lot of increased proletarianization of this sector which is taking place, which means that earlier, people were fishing on their own. Today, they are selling their labor power for their survival. They have become laborers in this. And this is the same trend which we find in the agriculture sector today, where the owner cultivator category has been declining. And the proportion of the laborers, whether it is agricultural labor or non-farm laborers, has been increasing. And we also find that fishing community, we have been involved in meeting their lives and livelihoods through traditional fishing, or what I call subsistence fishing, have been now pushed out. And either they sell the labor in the same sector or look for other options. This is an increasing trend we find as a result of the LPG regime or the pig regime, this trend towards increasing prioritization. I want to come back to this aspect a little late when I wind up my discussion, because it's an important part of the takeaway which we have. But at the moment, I'll focus on the other side of the things. What is the LPG regime, its impact on the rivers and things. And at the center, we also find that who are these people we are talking about? In fact, this is an interesting sector. We find this whole intersectionality of caste, class, and gender. If you talk about economic class, and we find some of the poorest people part of this regime. In terms of caste, we find that they are in the lowest rung of the caste hierarchy in India. And we also find quite a lot of, nearly 40-45% women participating in this. So we find that caste, class, and patriarchy interacting, intersecting each other. And this is something which we need to capture very well if you have to really find out the impact on this segment of the society which you are talking about. And all this together is acting on or impacting the fishers' lives and livelihood. So this is the type of a broad picturization which we like to do as a type of conceptual understanding of this. This also not cast in stone. This also an evolving thing, is a work in progress, and we would like to revise this with the inputs we get from this session and other discussions and things. Just quickly to the next one. This is type of a mapping we try to do in terms of the different fishing communities in the country, state-wise, region-wise. I don't want to get into the details of this. This will be with you later, so we can find. But one of the things which we need to take into account is that whatever the community which we talk about, except maybe in Bihar and UP, where the fishing community has got some political voice because of the sheer numbers and the way they organize. But in many of the other states, we find that very scattered in terms of the numbers are very few. In this, and also come from, because the caste and class background, you find there are the marginalized sections and things. Yeah, next one. So this is just broad numbers what you're talking about. The total fishing population is about 28 million in the country, and of this 23 million overwhelmingly are engaged in inland fisheries. Now when you talk about inland fisheries, not only capture river fisheries, but also talk about reservoir based fishing or aquaculture and other things. So that is something which we need to keep in mind. None of the sources we looked at could give a disaggregated figure for this. And of this population, we're talking about 56% are men, and nearly close to 50, that's about 45% are women involved in inland fishing. As I said, most of these communities belong to the backward class, scheduled caste, or what you call Dalit communities, or scheduled tribes or Adivasi population things. Fishing rights, we find there are 2-3 types of things is operating. One is the customary traditional rights the fishing communities in different states had in a very location specific manner. There are also fishers cooperatives which are coming up. And I think this is also, we find a upward trend after 1991, because the fishers have been asserting their rights collectively when the government went for more auctioning and corporate interests came in. To push back that, people have been getting organized around cooperatives and things. And also we find privatized licensing, royalty leasing and things. So these are the broad things which you're finding in these. And we also find that there's a weakened customary or informal tenure rights due to this increased marginalization of the traditional inland fisheries. Yeah, next one. This gives you a broad picture of what is the composition, what we're talking about pre-LPG and the post-LPG to some extent. So out of the total fish catch, inland accounts for something about 70%. And of that, nearly 2/3, nearly about 78% is aquaculture, which is something which goes with what Sebastian also mentioned in the earlier, when he started the session today. So that is the broad picture we find. And we find that from 89, 90 and 1991, we find that this whole trend of inland fisheries sharply going up, and marine fisheries to some extent getting stabilized at a particular level and things. And maybe from about 2000, 2001 onwards, this one takes a very sharp upward trend in this. That is primarily because pushed by the aquaculture type of culture fisheries, which has been encouraged under the new economic regimes and things. Next one. We find there are, I'm not going to get into details. This has been talked about in one of the earlier sessions. There are a whole lot of dams which are coming up and which is fragmenting the river systems, impacting the river health as well as the fish and fishers. Now, if you find these 2 decades of 7180 and 8190, we find the largest dams coming up in the country in a big manner and things, which has in a way has impact on things. Yeah, next one. Yeah, Neha, yeah. So this is what we are talking about. This whole question of inland what you call navigation, or rivers being used for inland transportation, which is coming as a huge project, infrastructure project in the country. I think Shripad was done a lot of work on this. We'll be talking about it later. Yeah, next. So this is the type of links which are talking about in terms of the different rivers. So for example, then maybe people who are sitting in Tamil Nadu may be able to eat hilsa, for example, because of the interlinking of rivers, which is going to happen. So the fish might, all this is going to create havoc in the biota and the fishes and things. Yeah, next. Sand mining. In fact, the last year's webinar was on sand mining, its impact on riverine health and various other type of things. Is also going to have a direct impact on fish and fishes. Next. This whole question of encroachments and real estate development, which has taken a push, got a push since the 90s in terms of this, which is also impacting the health of the wetlands, especially, and even the rivers, where floodplains have been taken over by infrastructure development of various types, which is taking place and things. Yeah, next. This is the latest on this whole beautification of the riverfronts, called the Riverfront Development, which is catching up every year. It's not only in Sabarmati we are talking, but in Pune we are now dealing with this issue. And there are hundreds of proposals which have come up to concretize and fragment the rivers because of all these things under the aim of beautification and things. Yeah, next. So basically, some of the issues which I like to highlight is that culture fishing, also supported by most of the policies today, is given priorities over the capture fisheries. Privatization of rivers and wetlands. In fact, the Shivnath story, most of us know, where I think in around 1998, Radius company was given a contract to, about 15-kilometer length of the river to build a barrage and use that water for industrial and other type of thing, where the local people were denied their access to the rivers, both fishers as well as for other drinking water. There was a massive movement. It's the first instance where stretch of a river was, privatized, and it has got its impact. And also we find that the larger reservoirs which have been built because of the whole infrastructure and dams and type of thing getting privatized. And there's also a site of conflict where the project affected people have been trying to assert their rights. And we know about the Tawa struggle in the 1996, where the Austies formed a cooperative and took over the rights and through a political struggle. Similarly, today we have Namdev, who will be talking about the Dimbe reservoir experience and things. And we also find that, in terms of other social facilities which are given to them are also quite minimal in terms of social security protection, other type of services which is there. And also the whole dispersed nature of the habitats, as I said earlier, and that is also related to them having no voice. And overall, there's a decline in the traditional fishing livelihood options. And because of that, they've been pushed out either from the sector or been pushed as, to sell their labor power to survive and things. Next one.
Joy, sorry to interrupt, but can you just wrap up?
Yeah. So I won't get into the legal regime. I think we have a separate session on the next one. The final slide, you can put it up. Yeah, I'll just wind it up. Yeah. So what is the takeaway from what I'm trying to say is that, I want to draw your attention to that diagram which I put. I think we need to engage with both these impacts. The impacts the changing political economy has on the ecosystems, especially the rivers, the wetlands, and then how it impacts on the lives and livelihoods of the people, the fishers, and also the other direct impacts which are talking about, because the various things we are talking about on the other side, which we talked about and things. So I think as a way forward, I'm not going to give any stipulated way for, type of thing, what are the type of thing, but broadly speaking, I think India River Forum, as well as anybody who are concerned, saying that we need to open up this conversation between people who are involved on not only on the river protection and the environmental side of things, which I call broadly environmentalists, and also people are fighting for the social justice in terms of equity, access, rights of different marginalized societies, and whether it is working class of today or the fishers communities and other type of toilets today. And there's a whole lot of struggles going on. And I think unless we have a conversation between these two sections, we won't be able to, solve the issue of both the deterioration of the health of the river, as well as the declining health of the overall marginalization of the fishers and the fishing community today, we need to talk about both this set of people. And also I would say that because the type of things are changing, issues are very complex, climate change and other type of things are happening, and what it is going to do with both the biophysical systems and the social systems, we need to understand. So how do we also deepen the conversation between people who are in the knowledge production and people who are in the activism? I think these two social segments also need to sit together, talk, and deepen and consult. So my last suggestion is that both the researchers, and we had a dedicated session on the research and data and other type of things. So my plea would be, if you have to move into a transformative politics, which will take care of the health of the rivers as well as the lives of the fishing or other marginalized communities. So both we need to have a new type of knowledge production in a co-production between the way we are visualizing, as well as deepen the conversation between people on the social justice of things who are doing, organizing, mobilizing people, and people are working on the environmental side of things need to come together. With this, I finish this, and in case any questions, we can take it up. Thank you. And sorry for a couple of minutes stretching it. Yeah.
Thank you, Joy, for setting up the context for this webinar. And I'm sure we'll, through the next panel discussion, we'll bring in more nuances. So I welcome our first panelist, Dr. Neelkant Mishra. Neelkant worked at the grassroots level in 2001 with the Right to Food movement. And there he witnessed tribal farmers failing to access the rightful lands due to lack of knowledge and law. In 2013, he founded the Center for Aquatic Livelihoods, Jal Jeevika, which is in Pune. And basically, he continues to advocate for the rights over water resources at the ground level. And lately, he's also involved in the building capacity at the ecosystem level and using market forces to accelerate the growth and development of these communities. So I request Neelkant Mishra to please present his.
Thank you for organizing this such a important theme, which was hardly discussed in the development sector, and this network and all those the organizations who are trying to build kind of consciousness in this sector. So without losing much time, I will move ahead with this. The thing like Joy has really given a very great way of presented the overall scenario, the political situations, the political economy basically in this sector. And so,
will you speak into the mic? The little not very audible. Just speak into the mic. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah,
sorry.
Is it fine now? Hello, am I audible?
This is audible. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So, like in this entire thing, in this entire globe, this world, we all know like the fresh water controls the entire economy part, whether it is industrialization or any other activity, agriculture. It's all the water that controls this entire political economy in the agri sector, in the digital sector, and it's hardly less than 1% of the fresh water that is available to all of us. But in that less than 1% of the water available, more than 80% is used for this river, through the agriculture, pond, and all this entire system. And surprisingly, this is only less than 1%, but yeah, it gives like $1 billion economy. The FAO data, whatever the Joy has already showcased us, like entire globally, if you look at, now we are touching nearly 200 million metric ton of the production, and it looks like a progress for any government, any agency, any international agency. So much of economy has been created. So this is only the production side. If you look at the entire value chain, there will be like billions of people engaged, millions of people engaged as a part of not only the fish catcher, but also in transportation, in processing, in drying, in several different activities. So the entire, if we collect the people engaged in this entire ancillary part of fishery and aquaculture, that will be used, and everything with the like 1% of the fresh water, which becomes so precious. And this is as in the initial days of the process, when we started working with the fishing community, it was more like promoting the livelihood. But the moment we gathered the information and the experience over the last few years, it's not like fishery based or aquaculture-based economy. It's more as a aquatic livelihood, which is useful for creating the resilience for the people's livelihood during this climate-related flood impact, the drought-related impact. This all kind of resilience framework comes from this aquatic livelihood. The water governance, the market engagement, the food security. So there are various elements, the gender elements. So many things are engaged with this aquatic livelihood segment. The anecdote I will give you, like we all give like so much of like Bihar, which is having the maximum wetland part in this entire country, which consumes so much of the fishing community's engagement, which is not documented. Like there will be like whatever the handbook says, 28 million people are engaged, but if we do the proper data sampling, there would be like billion, I'm sure. More than 30 million, 50 million more will come up, will join up in this process. And fishes are only the few options for the fisher of the Kosi River Basin or the Ganges River Basin in Bihar. We don't count the kind of other value-added product comes from the water, like singhara, makhana, the lotus. There are several other aquatic food, which the molasses. There are so many things which this fishing community collects, they sell, they use it for their food security. Recently, we had started work in Bihar, and this is a very good example I will showcase, like how this this political economy of the river and riverine, this reservoir, it impacts also, and how this wetland part also provide the resilience to this traditional community. So we all know, like because of this, corporatization of the fishery activity, most of the farmers are in the freshwater are started growing tilapia or pangasius fishes because of the productivity. Like in 1 acre, one can go 10 ton of fish production. Of course, investment is required, but your productivity enhances. That is the point of interest for a farmer or the government officer or the industry. And in Bihar also, we found like many farmers have started adopting the pangas fish culture. It required a lot of investment. And all those producers, they were not able to sell even 1 kg of fishes for last 4 months. And they were complaining even till January, February, we are not going to sell our fishes. We will be not able to sell our fishes. Why? Because this last 6 months, post July, when the river, when the flood situation comes, when the wetland get a lot of water, people catches all those indigenous fishes. So all those fishes, which is the part of their culture, are captured, harvested by the community members, which provides more economic value in the market than those fishes that is coming from the Andhra Pradesh or Pangasius. So it gives a hope. Like if Pangasius is sold in 120 rupees a kg, the local desi fishes will be sold in like 300, 400 rupees a kg. So that gives a hope also. It's not lost completely, but the market engagement, the role of the technology, whatever, that kind of creative engagement of the trade, of the market is not established with this kind of fishing community. So post 90, already a lot of things has been have been shared by the KJ, and but what I see in our experience is like there is a lot of absence and scope of work on the facilitation and entitlement process. Like take the example of Dimbe, where now the Namdev will share. And why only Dimbe? Like any large reservoir of the Madhya Pradesh, it is on been like the bidding amount is so high, like traditional community cannot afford to pay for that. So one of the largest reservoir of the Madhya Pradesh, Gandhi Sagar, their annual the lease amount is like 4 crore, 5 crore rupees. Of course, all those farmers, those or cooperative members who has protected that entire process for last so many years, they will become as a laborer for those contractors. So there is a very least amount of work has been done by the social sector, by the government, by the impact investor to build a facilitative process. So a lot of engagement is happening on the FPO side in agriculture sector. But the moment we look at the fishery aquaculture sector, there is a complete silence. And the another challenge what we see is like aggregation mode. Post liberation, like the moment the commercial activity starts, everyone wants to sell in like a big chunk as an aggregation. That's the market. That is how the market pushes. But in this capture fishery sector, we don't get, farmer doesn't get all the fishes in a big lot. So there will be different variety of fishes in different quantity with different quality parameters or the size parameter, which is not very interesting parameter for the traders or middlemen, but yeah, for the local community, for the village retailer, for the village hub, it all makes value. So how we start, changing our lanes, looking at mall only as a point of convergence for the marketing agent, or also make more effort to bring the diversity at the village heart level. So the moment we change our lanes, maybe the market facilitation process, the definition would change, and that would give a more hope to the community who are engaged in capture fishery and the standardization of process. So in the reservoir sector, another anecdote I would say, if you go to the Pranhita river side of the Gadchiroli, so in that the entire stretch of 30-40 kilometers, without any external agents, that community members, they have made their rule regulation. Like after every 100 meters, one family will get a stretch, and the netting process, the net size, it's not standard. There are the limitation, like who will put what kind of net, so that the next people will also have access to the fishes. And when the fishes will be cast, with month there will be fish ban, and all the traders from the nearby Telangana, nearby the Nagpur, they all come at that river side and buy fishes from the farmers. They don't go to the market.
Sorry to interrupt, but you have a minute to wrap up. Please.
Yeah. So another example is the moment if you go to the Dhule part where the lot of riverine fishery happens, the trader is coming from Gujarat to buy from them. So in the moment we look at from the scheme perspective, things will be really very diluted. So how any effort to make a clear standard SOP, I think it's not suitable for the riverine sector. And we are really missing in this entire discussion at the national policy level the value of aquatic plant. The moment we add it, there will be a huge level of potential to develop the cluster level planning, which we can work. So integrating the technology with this fragmented community will really give a lot of visibility. We can connect the dots, and the institutional development process, which is not happened yet, something new we can leverage. So how do we start using the data? How do we start using those institutional development process apart from those cooperative? All those things I think will be much more important when we discuss the riverine fishery, the capture fishery part in this segment. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Neelkanji, and I'm sorry, I know there's a shortage of time, but we'll take up the questions later on. So thank you for bringing those finer nuances, especially related to the livelihoods of the people. And we'll see how we can take up at the policy level. I'll move on to the next speaker. Our next speaker is Smita Tiwari Jasal, and she teaches at the social anthropology in the Middle East Technical University in Turkey. Until 2019, she was the professor of sociology in Delhi's Ambedkar University. She has authored many books, and her ongoing research explores issues of memory, livelihoods, and caste along the Ganga River. So over to you, Smita.
Thank you, Sarita, and thank you, Joy, and the other organizers for this wonderful opportunity. I really appreciate being part of this. I'm going to be very brief and sort of just begin with some of the few points I'm going to focus on. First will be a little discussion on the historical background, then a shift of how the shift of many fishers has occurred towards agriculture, then the ecological crisis and its challenges, and then a brief account of a very concrete women's fisher cooperative in Bihar, which I'd like to just sort of draw a few conclusions from there. And then if I have time, perhaps, to say something about the political concerns of fishers today and their negotiations in the political arena. And of course, I shall be drawing everything that I'm going to talk about from my ongoing studies in Bihar and Eastern UP, where most of these people that I'm talking about are sort of within the lower OBC category. So, and sometimes they are also aligning with the Dalits, but we'll talk about that when we think about the political landscape. Now, when considering the fisher communities, we must see them in conjunction with river communities, river-faring communities on the Ganga. These were people who were also transporters of goods and people by boats and so on. And these two groups, I think, together constitute the Nishad today. And they have similar kinds of issues. So we sort of have to take them into account together as a, conjunction with each other. And starting with the colonial onslaught, these groups were divested of their customary rights in ferries, fisheries, and river banks. So with the coming of the Grand Trunk Road, this was the first step that, eroded a lot of their rights. And then there was the railways. Many of the people were, pushed out and they were forced to shift to agriculture. So since then, they were always on the, sort of, let's say, on the fringes of land-based systems. And this transition for them was neither easy nor smooth. The first major onslaught came from the colonial state when they were identified also as criminal tribes. The colonial state was most perplexed about how to deal with mobile peoples. And so to better control them and police them, they were made to settle in demarcated areas. And of course, this meant greater state vigilance and policing. And even after independence, we find that these categories have persisted in the public consciousness, and it continues till today. While I was doing my fieldwork, I constantly kept coming across people who sort of assumed that they are criminal, that they have these tendencies. And why this is so interesting is because in this understanding, certain groups are by their very nature supposed to be predisposed to criminality. This thinking attributes a certain caste essence to blood, a tendency or a character trait supposed to be inherited by birth. Now, coming to the question of shift to agriculture, I would say that the closing of the Farakka barrage and then the prohibitions of fishing in the Ganga, actually spelled the death knell for fishing communities. In agriculture, they found themselves, when they moved to agriculture, they found themselves in the lowest rungs as marginal peasants, battling for the same resource that is land. We find them distributed across the entire, agrarian categories or classes in the lower rungs, you could say, starting with tenants, mobile peasants, marginal peasants, agricultural labor, both with and without land. So what does this experience actually illuminate? That when groups are compelled to make a monumental shift from water-based to land-based occupations, they are in competition for scarce resources already cornered by others. Such transitions also involve not just occupational, but transformative ecological and geographical dislocations, inducing cycles of marginality and vulnerability, which are difficult to overcome. Now, the marginality of the fishers was further exacerbated by the indiscriminate development models, which have been mentioned already, wherein much building activity has occurred with no regard to the management of water and water bodies. This brings me to the ecological crisis they face. So let me just come up with some figures, which I'm sure you're familiar with, but I'm just repeating them for those who are, hearing these for the first time. In June 2019, it was reported that in the past 70 years, out of the 30 lakh water bodies in Bihar alone, 20 lakhs had disappeared. These include ponds, wells, pokhars, lakes. And 20 years ago, there were 20 lakh private and state ponds, and these were reduced to 98,101. In Bihar, out of the 501 small lakes, 48 had dried up. Small and big rivers and lakes, UP has about 1,79,000 wells, out of which in only 5 years, we find that 77,000 had dried up. So there are 24 lakes, and in the past 5 years, 12 have dried up. So what we have in their place, that's the question, then what is it? So we have sandy, stony fields, shopping complexes, multiplexes, and airports. So, and further, I would like to add that the Yamuna investigations are revealing the presence of arsenic in the water, heavy metal, iron, nickel, and other toxic substances. And also the plaster of Paris idols that are immersed because of our systems of celebrations in which we immerse idols into rivers. We find that this plaster of Paris does not degrade, so they are there. Coming now to the gender question, I thought it best to discuss the gender question in relation to an experiment in UP and Bihar in the late 90s, when the state had hoped to revive water bodies by giving ponds to fisher cooperatives for 10-year leases. Meanwhile, the cooperatives were also to be taught the rudiments of fish cultivation, and especially how the spawn are to be placed in a kind of like a ladder sort of thing, different phases in different spaces for them. So this is what they had to be taught. Now, I wish to talk about this experiment with reference to a concrete case, as I said, in Madhubani in North Bihar, where a couple of villages were taken over by fisherwomen's cooperatives, and the members registered for the ponds allotment. Now, when the fisher cooperatives were invited to send in their tenders, the women found that this requires enormous down payments, which effectively eliminates the fishers from the race altogether. And instead, the public auctions of this kind were favoring those already entrenched interests, those who already had entrenched interests, such as upper caste, more well-off people, and village elites generally. So, however, in this case, the women's cooperative that I researched did manage to get their tender accepted. They, of course, raised a lot of money through all sorts of ways, and they managed, and they found money to go ahead with this scheme, and they were allotted a pond. But they found themselves powerless to resist the corruption that they found, which was ongoing. For example, the Mallah males, Mallah and Nishad, often used interchangeably in this area. The Mallah males were routinely bribed to register the ponds in their names, so that because this was for a fishing system, the Mallahs were voluntarily giving their names so that the thing could be registered in their names. But actually, it was the upper caste and other village elite who were controlling the pond. So this was something that came to light, and I've written about it, but I just wonder how many would actually make use of this material in order to actively pursue this thing so that it doesn't ever happen again. But this is
a minute to wrap up.
Okay, so in some cases, the Mallah leaders took contracts on their own and then subletting the ponds for their own thing. So the women were subjected to a whole range of hostility. Often they would begin from this hostility would begin from their own family members, their own neighborhoods, and so on. And I want to sort of quote this, that one of the women told me that they were laughed at by the men who said they are off to lounge around on chairs, drink tea, and wear sandals. I mean, in one village, the Brahmins who had controlled 30 ponds. Why Brahmins were controlling 30 ponds, and they had been doing it for ages. Now they tried to chase away these women. So in another case, there were Muslims who said, oh, these women are polluting our gravesite. So then they had to fight that. So in the end, they ended up fighting court cases. But the most really traumatic, I think, and most disturbing for me was to see how it took them 3 to 4 years to clean out the ponds. And it was absolutely overgrown with vegetation and fronds and so on. And they had to pull that out. And their hands and their upper bodies were always bleeding. They were always covered with bruises, and they were bleeding all the time. It took them that long. Finally, of course, they did succeed. They did it. And the final thing that what was the real crazy setup in this was that they had to kind of every night for 10 years, they sat one by one, they took turns to sort of keep an eye on the pond, because the Brahmins were constantly putting their finest nets to catch the fish. So imagine having to safeguard the pond like this. However, of course, in the end, it worked out well in the sense that they were able to, it really changed their lifestyle. The whole economic conditions of the families really improved. But moreover, I think what's really fantastic is that they learned how to deal with at so many levels, with the courts, with the male elite, with the caste elite, with the village elites, all sorts of these things. I mean, they were over 10 years, they were transformed beings. And I have cited this example only to say that there are a lot of such water bodies lying around. And if they need to be revived, I think we ought to sort of put into place as a policy measure that we give them to women's groups of this kind, women's cooperatives, and they can really bring it around and do something transformational. It's just that we have not really explored the potential of this women's power. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Smita, so much for that valuable insight which you've given us. And I'm sure we have a lot more to understand. The next speaker is Bibah Kumari. She's the director of the Asian Pacific chapter of the World Aquaculture Society. Her expertise lies in fish biology, social fishing, gender, and environmental science. And she also recently received the Knowledge Excellence Award for a contribution in the field of environmental sciences. So over to you, Bibah. Please keep it to the time. Yes.
Thank you, Neha, and thank you, Joy. Thank you all the Indian River Water Forum team who are organizing this session for the River Water Week. And it is a great pleasure and having a great opportunity to speak on this platform. Thank you to all of you. Now my topic, because already Joy and Sebastian has discussed about the inland fisheries community and their problem and all these things. So just I want to say that inland fishery community was completely based on capture fishing, not the culture fishing from the ancient time. But now human development has compelled to do the culture fishes, and the culture-based fishing was going to be upward, and capture fishes going to be downwards. And there is so many issues and so many reasons behind this, why the people are going to be to choose capture fishes, not culture fishes, not the capture fishes. Why the community, the fishery community, keeping away from the capture fishes. So just I want to give some information that there is no fixed time how the people or how the human has learned to capture the fishes. Because if we will go to the historical time, you will see that some of the caves there is a found of human are hunting the fishes or capturing the fishes from the river or the water area, but there is no any sign or symbol to culture fishes. But now the culture, this is the era of the culture fishing. Neha, please, next slide. Just next slide. Okay, so in this sector, so people are involved in the fish capture from river, ponds, local water bodies, and larger basin areas. And these capture fishes is actually providing the all income for their livelihood for families, and their all responsibility to cover all the responsibility. But now the scene is different. Next slide, please. And the scene is different because from ancient time to recent time, the system or the upward uplifting of these communities is not looking better. Now, till this date, mostly their status is under below poverty line, and they are actually found in urban areas and living in maximum living in the river or the water body, near about the water bodies, that means the rural areas. Just keep on mind on the literacy rate, very slowly increasing until this day 39 to 40% in Bihar. No idea about the other state because my study area is Bihar, and I'm keeping eye on only in Bihar state. Their profession is fish catching, but apart from fish catching, they are working on other sector, other area also, like the construction area, marketing, as a wholesale or the retail and trading in other sectors also. So the people of the inland fisher community is working in the fish capturing for the particular time, for morning or evening time, and rest of the time they are engaging themselves in the agriculture and other work. Next slide. After harvesting of the fish from the river or the water bodies, these capture fishes community just after harvesting of the for the harvesting of the fish from the rivers, the women, the role of the women starts because women are responsible to processing all these fishes and marketing. It was before the time because recent 20 years, this scene is completely different and slowly changing towards the male side. Their literacy rate is very low in the market system. I'm talking about the market system. Their participation is going to be declining. Their literacy rate is very low. If you will visit in the market, you will find that very few vendors are educated. Even they are not educated up to the primary level. Women are completely no literacy. It is not a good sign that the market system is run by this type of people, and they were not scared or not feared that they are not educated because they handle everything very nicely. If they have no literacy or no education, but they are very confident, that means women are very confident and expert of negotiation during purchasing and selling of fish, and efficient the calculation of the amount, even in the fraction of the weight of the fish. So just imagine how the women are very skilled because they are getting these type of information from their ancestral part, that means the mother and the father, like that, and they involved in the fish market without any literacy. This is very remarkable point. But in the wholesale market, the male persons were dominated and wholesale market, and they were literate. So my study has found that in the wholesale market and the retail market, they are educated. They are educated. It doesn't mean they are graduate. They are educated means they are educated up to the high school level. But in the local market in urban area like Patna and Bhagalpur and Muzaffarpur, these areas were covered by the without literate person, and they are handling everything very nicely, but they need some uplifting towards the education, because today and the coming day will come with more challenge, so they have to face it, so they need to be educated. Next slide. This slide is showing the status of the women status in the fish market, and the reason of declining is maximum space which are earmarked by the government are occupied by the male folks, and male folks are more efficient in the inter-marketing competition skill. Inter-marketing competition skill, that means there is some conflict with the local people, all the political people, all the selling sites. They are more competent, but women participation is declining because they have no safety and security at that place, and but they are very skilled for the negotiation. Their behavior is very fine, compromising attitude, maintaining more hygienic condition. So the consumer likes to purchase these fishes from the women rather than the men. But in absence of women, the people are taking the fish from there. Please, next slide. Now the riverine fisheries is completely changing because due to the climate change and due to the human intervention also. If we are talking about the Ganga River, this river is very largest river in India. So the largest inland river basin also. In support of fishery resources, it contributes significant economic benefit to the riverine communities. But now, due to the climatic condition and due to the human intervention, their aquatic life has been very much affected, declined, and their ecosystem productivity, distribution, and abundance of aquatic competitors and predators disease, thereby affecting the livelihood and food security of the fishing community. The changing pattern of rainfall, that means sometimes it goes to be very high rainfall, and sometimes annual rainfall is very low. So due to the high temperature, low rainfall, declining the water availability in the river, and these low availability of water also affecting the fish population. Please, next. Next slide, please. This is a scene of some of the part of the river Ganga. You can see that this is a bridge construction. There is a floating bridge on river side. Some of the effluent has been input in the river, and dumping of garbage, some of the part of the Bihar. In Patna, there is a control dumping of the garbage near the river Ganga, because Pollution Control Board has taken the action and deputed some Ganga Prahari to clean the Ganga and to save the Ganga from these type of activities.
Bibah, you have a minute to wrap up, please.
Yes, sure. So this is a next slide, please. This is a scene of the Ganga during the summer time or during the March, April, May. You can say that after November, it is start to declining the water from the riverside, and it looks like a sandy area all over around the river Ganga. Next slide, please. Next. So the present status of the River Ganga is declining of the fishing areas, loss of nursery bed, depletion of fish population, extinction of fish species, almost 19 to 20 species are already extinct, reduction of maximum size of fishes, that means their size is going to be declined, the maximum uptake of the size is not possible, disease and contaminated fish availability, and increase of invasive predators are also found in River Ganga in recent time. Next slide, please. Now, these activities problem giving the fishery community to migrate from this side to other side. This side means fishing side to the other side. Also, the available resources and the question on livelihood compared to migrate from other side. It is not only the fishing practices, fishing areas, but it also migrated from fishing practices. Some of the fisher community is now engaging themselves in different part like construction, like rickshaw puller, like vegetable vendors, and other sectors also. So these things are actually created problem to their livelihood, and so that they migrated from other sectors. So what is the next slide, please? What are the government policies and actions right now in the Bihar? There is a Pradhan Mantri Matsya Yojana. It is all over India. National policy on the inland fisheries and aquaculture. Already know it. Training program to fisher folks. This program's training program has been done by the ICR, CFRI or CFA, and also some of the companies also providing the training program to the fisher folks to use their tools. Training program for river life management system is also undergoing by the Green Skill Development Program by Ministry of Environment, Forest, Climate Change project under the. And there is a subsidized rate of fish seeds available, loan availability with subsidized interest, and fish ranching program in river by ICR CFRI is also a very good initiative. And this is conducted, this program is conducted since 2017-18. And during this, actually, during this program, lots of fish seed, that means started by 40,000 to 40,000 fish has been introduced in the river Ganga, and since 2 to 3 years continuous ICR CFRI is introducing the fish seed or yearlings to the Ganga river to rejuvenate the fishing fish population in river Ganga. And these type of fishes are actually IMC, that is Indian Measure Card. So this is a good initiative program. Next, please.
Sorry, Dr. Bibah,
Okay.
I have to stop you here. Maybe we can take up the recommendations. If we
Can you show the last picture? Thanks. Oh, okay.
Okay.
Actually, just I'm talking it. This picture is taken in the river Ganga. Very few women are actually available in the river Ganga because women are not available in the river capture fishing practices. But this picture is very rare and it is captured by me. So please, okay, I'm sorry. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. So thank you for bringing the community perspective. Rather, for the last two presentations, we've seen a lot of angles from how the fishing communities live, what are their issues. Now, the next speaker we have is somebody from the fishing community itself. His name is Namdev Bhangare. He comes from the Swarali village in Ambegaon Taluka, and he is the secretary of the Dimbhe Jalashay Shramik Adivasi Machimar Sahkari Sanstha, that's a cooperative at the Dimbhe Reservoir. And he will quickly share his own experience and what problems they had in forming the cooperative. He will be talking in Marathi, and later I will be translating briefly in English. So Namdev Bhangare ji. नामदेव तुम्ही अनम्यूट करा आणि सुरुवात करा बोलायला. तुम्हाला अनम्यूट करावं लागेल कारण तुमचा आवाज ऐकू येत नाहीये. त्या व्हिडिओच्या शेजारी जे बटन आहे. हो हो ओके.
येतोय आवाज? हॅलो.
हो येतोय.
डिंभे जलाशयाच्या परिसरामध्ये जी काही मच्छीमारी केली जाते तर त्याच्या संदर्भात मी थोडक्यात एक आढावा हे करतो. डिंभे जलाशय होण्याच्या अगोदरची जी पूर्वीची परिस्थिती होती त्याच्यामध्ये डिंभे जलाशयाच्या परिसरामध्ये महादेव कोळी आदिवासी लोक राहत होते. त्याचबरोबर थोड्याफार प्रमाणात कातकरी समाज पण राहत होता या ठिकाणी. त्याच्यानंतर मग महादेव कोळी हा समाज होता, यांचा मच्छीमारीचा व्यवसाय नव्हता. हे आपले शेती व्यवसाय करून स्वतःचा उपजीविका भागवत असायचे. त्याच्यानंतर कातकरी जो समाज होता थोड्याफार प्रमाणात, तर ह्या कातकरी समाजाचा मच्छीमारीचा व्यवसाय होता. ते काय करायचे, नदीच्या पावसाळ्या दिवसाला नदीमध्ये किवटे साह्याने मच्छीमारी करायचे आणि उन्हाळ्याच्या दिवसाला ते डोहामध्ये झोळून मच्छीमारी करून आसपासच्या गावामध्ये मच्छी विकून आपला स्वतःचा उदरनिर्वाह करत असे. त्याच्यानंतर 1976 साली डिंभे धरणाची सुरुवात झाली आणि ह्या जलाशयातून 25 गाव विस्थापित झाली. त्याच्यामध्ये 12 पूर्णतः विस्थापित आणि 13 गावे अंशतः विस्थापित झाली. तर याच्यामध्ये मग ही जी गावे विस्थापित झाली त्याच्यामध्ये एकूण 1254 कुटुंब प्रकल्प बाधित झाली. तर प्रकल्प बाधित झाल्याच्या नंतर मग जे काही त्यांचं पुनर्वसन होणे गरजेचं होतं, तर याच्यामध्ये आजही सरकारकडनं 350 लोकांचं पुनर्वसन होणे बाकी आहे. तर मग जेव्हा लोक विस्थापित झाल्याच्या नंतर पुनर्वसन झालं नाही, आजूबाजूला छोटीशी झोपडं करून राहू लागली आणि मग जे काही थोडीफार शिल्लक डोंगर उताराची शेती होती अशा ठिकाणी ते दळ्याची शेती करून आपलं स्वतःची उपजीविका भागवत होते. परंतु त्यांचे मग पोटाला पोटभर अन्नधान्याची उपलब्धता होत नव्हती, आर्थिक समस्या निर्माण होत होते. त्याच्यामुळे मग त्यांचं मजुरीसाठी बाहेर गावी खूप मोठ्या प्रमाणात स्थलांतर होत होते. आणि जो कातकरी समाज होता तर ह्या समाजाचा पूर्वीचा व्यवसायच मच्छीमारीचा असल्याने आणि धरण झाल्याच्या नंतर त्यांच्याकडे साधनं नव्हती, होडी जाळ्या अशा प्रकारची साधने नव्हती आणि ते विकत घेण्याची त्यांची परिस्थिती नव्हती. त्याच्यामुळे मग त्यांचा मच्छीमारीचा व्यवसाय पूर्णपणे बंद झाला. अशा वेळी ही लोक भट्टीवरती वीट म्हणून जाऊ लागली. मग त्याच्यातनं मग त्यांच्या मुलांचा शिक्षणाचा पण हे होऊ लागला, कारण मुलांना ते बरोबर घेऊन जायचे, त्याच्यामुळे मुलं शिक्षणापासून दुरावली. अशा परिस्थितीमध्ये मग हे लोकांना स्थानिक पातळीवरती रोजगार कसा उपलब्ध होईल यासाठी मग 2002-03 साली एक संघटन बांधणी तयार केली आणि यांचं संघटन मजबूत करून जे काही शेजारी डिंभे जलाशय होते तर ह्या जलाशयावरती जर मच्छीमारी या लोकांनी केली तर त्यांना स्थानिक पातळीवरती रोजगार उपलब्ध होईल आणि यांचं जे मजुरीसाठी होणारे स्थलांतर आहे ते पूर्णपणे कमी होईल. तर ह्या हेतूने मग त्याच ठिकाणी पण एक खाजगी ठेकेदाराकडे जलाशयाचा ठेका होता. त्याच्यानंतर तो ठेकेदार बाहेरून मच्छीमार आणून या ठिकाणी मच्छीमारी करत असायचा. मग या संघटनेच्या नेतृत्वाखाली या लोकांनी विरोध केला आणि त्या ठेकेदाराला सांगितलं की बाबा या ठिकाणी जे मच्छीमारी करायची असेल तर हे स्थानिक लोकांचा वापर करूनच तू मच्छीमारी केली पाहिजे आणि मग तू ज्या रेटने मच्छी त्याच्याकडनं मारून घेतो त्या रेटने ही लोक पण तुम्हाला मच्छी पकडून देतील असं ठरलं. असं ठरल्याच्या नंतर त्या ठेकेदाराने कुठल्याच प्रकारचं बीज जलाशयात सोडलं नव्हतं आणि ह्या लोकांचं मच्छी 2 दिवस नेली, त्याच्यानंतर नेली नाही. याच्यामुळे लोकांचं फार मोठ्या प्रमाणात नुकसान झाले आणि मग त्या ठेकेदाराकडनं बीज जलाशयात सोडलं नव्हतं याच्यामुळे त्याच्याकडनं ठेका काढून घेण्यात आला. शेवटी 29/5/2006 ला डिंभे जलाशय श्रमिक आदिवासी मच्छीमार सोसायटी रजिस्ट्रेशन झाली आणि ह्या सोसायटी मार्फत मच्छीमारीला सुरुवात झाली. त्याच्यानंतर मग मच्छीमारी करायला सुरुवात झाली, परंतु जो महादेव कोळी समाज होता तो मच्छीमारीच्या प्रवाहात यायला थोडस उशीर लागला, कारण ते लोकांना त्याचं व्यवसायाची आवड नव्हती. मग आस्ते आस्ते ती लोक करायला लागल्याच्या नंतर त्यांना त्याची आवड निर्माण झाली आणि मग सुरुवातीला टायर ट्यूबच्या साह्याने मच्छीमारी करत होते. त्याच्यानंतर मग आदिवासी विभाग रोटरी क्लबच्या मदतीने काही होडी जाळ्यांची उपलब्ध करून लोकांना मच्छीमारी करायला होड्या आणि जाळी उपलब्ध झाली आणि बऱ्यापैकी तो व्यवसाय पुढे चालू लागला. त्याच्यातनं मग जो काही बाहेरून बीज विकत घ्यायला लागायचं, मत्स्य विभागाकडे बीजाची मागणी केली तर पुरेशा प्रमाणात बीज उपलब्ध होत नव्हता. अशा वेळी मग स्थानिक मच्छीमारांनी मत्स्यबीज कसं तयार करायचं याचे ट्रेनिंग घेऊन स्थानिक पातळीवरतीच मत्स्यबीज तयार करून पुरेशा प्रमाणात जलाशयामध्ये बीज संचयन करण्यास सुरुवात केली. बऱ्यापैकी सोसायटीचं काम चालू झालं, लोकांना रोजगार उपलब्ध झाला आणि जे काही मजुरीसाठी बाहेरगावी होणारे स्थलांतर होते ते कमी झाले आणि कातकरी समाजाचं जे काही वेठबिगार म्हणून ते बाहेर जात होते त्यांचं पण प्रमाण कमी झालं आणि त्यांची मुलं पण शाळेमध्ये शिकू लागली. असं सगळं होत असताना त्याच्यानंतर मग जे काही सरकारच्या जे बदलते धोरण आणि पॉलिसी याच्यामध्ये मग असं झालं की धरणाचा पूर्वीचा ठेका रक्कम 1,54,000 रुपये होता. मध्यंतरी ती ठेका रक्कम 54,000वरून 1,21,000 वरती गेली, म्हणजे ती ठेका रक्कम दुप्पट झाली आणि पुन्हा मग ती 54,000 वरती आली. परंतु नंतर मग 1,000 हेक्टर क्षेत्राच्या जास्त क्षेत्र असलेले जे क्षेत्र ते क्षेत्र मच्छी महामंडळात आधी होतं आणि त्यांनी मग नंतर ती जलाशय मच्छी महामंडळाकडे वर्ग केले आणि मग मच्छी महामंडळाकडे वर्ग केल्याच्या नंतर मच्छी महामंडळाने त्याच्यावरती ओपन स्टँडर्ड काढले. ओपन स्टँडर्ड काढल्याच्या नंतर मग याच्यामध्ये मग जी काही मच्छी महामंडळाची लीज अमाऊंट होती तर ती होती 7,10,550 रुपये ही कमीत कमी होती आणि त्याच्यामध्ये ओपन स्टँडर्ड मध्ये जर जास्तीत जास्त जो लीज अमाऊंट भरेल तर त्याला त्या जलाशयाचा ठेका घेता येऊ शकत होता. तर अशा परिस्थितीमध्ये मग हे जे सोसायट्या आहेत त्या सोसायट्या इथं तग धरू शकत नव्हत्या ओपन स्टँडर्डमुळे. तर मग याच्यामध्ये मग जे काही समजा मोठी लोक असतील, कोणी कंपनीवाले असतील किंवा कोणी पॉलिटिक्सवाले असतील, तर ही मोठी लोक ह्या जलाशयांचा ठेका भरून ते त्या ठिकाणी त्याच्यावरती ताबा घेऊ शकत होते. अशा परिस्थितीमध्ये मग आम्हाला हायकोर्टात जावं लागलं आणि मग हायकोर्टात जाऊन आम्हाला त्याच्या बाबत मग हायकोर्टात याचिका दाखल करावा लागली आणि मग त्याच्यानंतर हायकोर्टामध्ये स्टे ऑर्डर दिली. याच्यानंतर मुख्यमंत्र्यांच्या सचिवांबरोबर एक मीटिंग लावण्यात आली आणि त्याच्यामध्ये असं ठरवण्यात आले की जर आदिवासी लोकांची सोसायटी आहे, इतक्या वर्ष आम्ही ही सोसायटी कार्यरत आहे, तर मग जे काही मच्छी महामंडळाने कमीत कमी लीज अमाऊंट ठरलेली आहे 7,10,550 रुपये, तर ही ह्या सोसायटीला भरावं लागेल. तर मग एवढी क्षमता नव्हती तशी भरायची, कारण जे काही कातकरी लोक होते ते त्यांच्याकडे एवढं पुरेसं हे नव्हतं, म्हणजे लोकसहभाग कोणी देऊ शकत नव्हता. थोडंफार अशा याच्यातनं कर्ज थोड्याफार लोकांकडनं काढून सलग 2 वर्षे सोसायटीचा ठेका भरला, परंतु एकदमच ठेका रक्कम जास्त असल्याने बाकीच्या गोष्टी त्याच्यातनं पेलवणे अवघड झाल्याने मग सध्याची परिस्थिती थोडीशी अवघड याच्यात दिसते, म्हणजे की लोकांचा इतका म्हणजे आता मच्छीमारला एवढं हे नाही म्हणजे पूर्वीसारखं, कारण हे सगळ्या गोष्टी कव्हर करायला थोडं अवघड होते.
धन्यवाद नीलकंठजी, तुम्ही अगदी थोडक्यात मांडल्यामुळे. I will just quickly translate as what sorry, not Nilkant, Namdev, for presenting this. So basically Namdev comes from a Mahadev Koli Samaj, and he was talking about the kind of condition which was there before the Dimbhe Dam was constructed. So mainly the communities were of the Mahadev Koli who owned land, and they were into the agriculture activity, and there were a few people from the Katkari community who were landless, but they were dependent directly on the river, and used to sell their fish catch to the nearby market. The Dimbhe Dam was built in 1976, and around 25 villages had to be displaced because of this. And since they worked, most of them got rehabilitated, but there were still around 350 families which are to be rehabilitated. And they mainly worked as laborers in bricklane areas, and they also kind of did subsistence farming on the slopes of the nearby mountains. So in 2002, Sashwat organization, it's a local organization which supported these fishing communities, and through their help, they could form a cooperative society. And they could actually mobilize the fishing nets and gears, and they could re-establish the fishing activity in the Dimbe Reservoir. In the beginning, as there's a rule that there was a private contractor who was providing the seedlings, and there was kind of an agitation between the fishing communities and the private the contractor. That they should not be allowed to do the fishing in the reservoir, but through a lot of agitation and support from the local organization, the fishing community could establish their hold, and they were able to do the fishing activities in the reservoir. Then they had to mobilize seeds, and through this organization, the capacity building program was done. The local communities were trained as how to prepare the seedlings. And over the course of time, what they could observe is the fishing catch has been increased. The price what they got is also more than what is got at the nearby villages. And migration decreased. The children of these these families are now able to go to school and have a better living. A GR was circulated, I think it was in 2017, where the area more than 1,000 hectares of land, the lease amount was increased. So earlier it was around 54,000, and from there on it went to 7 lakhs. And there it was difficult for the fishing communities to mobilize such a huge amount of money. I think they filed a petition in the High Court, and a stay order was given. However, the High Court decided that if the Adivasi society has to pay the lease amount, and so they had to take a loan from the or from the banks or other local amount, and they were able to pay for the last 2 years. But now they are having other issues in maintaining that cooperative. So this is what Namdev spoke about. And it really shows the kind of policies also our government brings up with, and what challenges these fishing communities need to go through. With this, I will move on to our last speaker, Sushmita Mandal. Sushmita is an applied researcher manager with 2 decades of experience working in conservation and livelihood. Her key expertise lies in the transboundary resource governance and climate change adaptation. She worked at the IUCN, and during her association, she was involved in and initiated work on the grassroots diplomacy for conservation of the hilsa fish and livelihoods of fisheries across riverscapes in India and Bangladesh. So Sushmita, over to you.
Thank you, Sarita, for that introduction, and thank you, India Rivers Forum, for this opportunity to talk about some of the issues around around rivers and fishers and the fishes in there. I'll try and bring in my experiences from the work that I have been doing on transboundary governance aspects, where we were looking at the Ganga, Brahmaputra, Meghna basin. And within that, we were looking at aspects of what was happening to hilsa, which is a key species that has a lot of emotive value in the Bengal Delta, so to say. So to just introduce the fish and what it means to the Bengal Delta, it's a huge cultural icon in the Delta, and it's embedded in rituals, in language, and in diplomacy. When I talk about rituals, there are rituals in the Bengal Delta around using the fish as they use a pair of hilsa for a wedding ritual in West Bengal as well as in Bangladesh. And it's an important aspect, and it clearly shows how important the fish was to the cultural moorings of the state, so to say. It's embedded in the language of the region. And I'll here quote a very small nursery rhyme that was penned in 1916 by Shatyendranath Dotto, which says, Ilche guri, ilche মাছের ডিম, ইলচে গুড়ি, দিনের বেলায় হীন, This basically talks about, it basically speaks about using the metaphor of the eggs of the hilsa, which are fine, which are likened to fine granules of these are like the light and cold rains of the monsoons, and hilsa is most savored during that time, and it's talking about how these small droplets are similar to the eggs of the hilsa, which is also a delicacy in the Bengal Delta. Moving on to talking about how this cultural icon has also been used as a power for diplomacy. And this was something that Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina has used very effectively in her ties with the Indian government when the Ganges Water Treaty was signed in 1996. As a token of appreciation, she sent hilsa from Bangladesh to the then Chief Minister of West Bengal, Jyoti Basu. And further on, when the Tista Accord did not get finalized because Mamta was unsure that the Tista Accord will do any good for West Bengal. So when she came back to power in 2014, again, Sheikh Hasina used hilsa as a gift to commemorate the win that she had had. And then she said that let's hope that I can allow the hilsa to go to West Bengal from Bangladesh as much as you can allow the Tista waters to come to Bangladesh. So this is how hilsa has been important in the Bengal Delta, not just in terms of culture, but also in terms of how it's used politically as soft power. Similarly, when we talk about the economy of the fish, and something that Sebastian was earlier mentioning, that when we are talking about fisheries, we have to link the inland with the estuarine with the marine. And hilsa for me is a proxy for that entire system, because it is an anadromous fish that moves from the marine into the freshwater system to complete its life cycle. And in the process, it provides for employment for more than 5 million people within India and Bangladesh. And for Bangladesh, it's so important that it contributes to about 2.2 billion US dollars of their GDP, which is close roughly 1% of their GDP. These are numbers that I'm quoting from the 2017 financial report of Bangladesh. And in the context of West Bengal, when we talk about, how much is the fishing revenue that is generated from hilsa, and that's about that amount is about 70%, and that's how important hilsa is economically, as well as in providing livelihoods of communities that live off this fish. So coming back to the point of, yes, there is the fish, yes, there's the river, and what is happening to these communities that actually bring this fish to our plates. And there's very little that has been understood or that has been looked at. It's often that, communities become this entire black box of, oh, they're just communities that are fishing. But when you start looking at who these communities are and where are they located. So in the context of West Bengal, when I was doing this research as part of the work in IWA, actually, when we started looking at which communities largely populate the stretch of the river, there's the Rajbongshis, which are in the upper stretches of the Hooghly, and then in the middle stretches, the bigger communities, that of the Malo, which is similar to the Mallas in UP and Bihar. And then we have the Jele Koibortos, which usually are in the estuarine, and they are also the marine labor. They are the labor in the marine trawlers that go into the Bay of Bengal, which are also fishing it. In Bangladesh, also, when you're looking, I haven't put in those names here, but in Bangladesh, because it is largely a Muslim country, it looks at, there are just two communities that they refer to. They call as Mochojibis, which are the lowest rungs of the society in their context as well. But there's also a very important important thing to talk about here is the Nokabashi Jele communities. The Nokabashi Jele community is a community that lives on the boat. So they live their entire life on the boat, and they have absolutely no relationship with the land, so much so that in a lot of places they do not have citizenship rights, because citizenship rights are often defined by your linkages with the land. And that's why they're so much more marginalized. And the loss in catch of hilsa is impacting them the most. often these are also people, I mean, the history of the Nokobashi Jeles is that during the 71 War of Independence of Bangladesh, a lot of people escaped into the river when they were being attacked, and in the process the men probably died and the women just continued to live on the river. And as much as it's a political issue, as much as it is an identity crisis there, and often it's often been seen, and that's something that Smita and Bibah have also mentioned, that the loss of land and river, how that shift has happened, is very clearly visible in the case of Bangladesh, where the erosion of the river has led people to move away from land into river, because land gets eaten away in Bangladesh because of the deltaic system that exists, and because of which, what is the other source of income? And then they all become river faring or seafaring fishermen in that context. So often that is how, even in the context of Bangladesh, in the context of India, when I'm talking about West Bengal, this is something that you see again and again. There's this one particular example I'll bring from a place called the Shannal Chor, which is on the Hooghly. It's a village that has that's been relocated at least 10 times in the last 20 years because the water just erodes their place, and they still continue to just find some land somewhere, and then they continue to be part of the river system because that's where they see their identity is connected to. And that's something that we often miss out on when we are talking about what is happening to the rivers and how it is impacting communities who are actually very closely dependent with the river. While one does understand that in this larger context, and as I've said in the past, that Hilsa for me is a proxy for what's happening to everything else inside the river, all other resources, all other fish species. Of course, Hilsa is a high value fish, so it still remains the mainstay of riverine fisheries in West Bengal and in Bangladesh as well. But while speaking and engaging with communities, they've also mentioned that almost more than 70% of the commercially viable freshwater fish species have declined, that the communities have reported during our conversations with them. There's also
Sushmita.
Yeah, there's also mention of how pollution and increasing levels of silt, how the river changing water courses, and how erosion and closure of certain parts is impacting the movement of the fish in the river and therefore the livelihoods of the fisherfolk. And of course, all of this is linked to how food security of these people gets impacted, because the small and indigenous fish species are also declining in because the river health is declining. And those are aspects that you have to look at when we are talking about what's happening to fishers and the fishing in the riverine ecosystem. So going back to two important things, and here I want to come back to the point around conservation of Hilsa, which has taken a huge sort of focus, at least in Bangladesh. So in the late 90s, both in Bangladesh and India, there was a huge decline in the catch of the Hilsa. And as a result of which, in 2003, Bangladesh was one of the first countries that started off with bans, that there was an understanding that if we could ban fishing during the spawning season, that can help the species to revive. It is a fecund fish, it's a highly fecund fish. So that's how it started, and it led to an increase in fish catch, at least in Bangladesh. And through the work that I was doing at IUCN and through the learnings that one was gaining out of that work, we were able to also work with the government of West Bengal to then bring about some changes in the way they look at policy and the need to therefore look at issues of conservation. But I would also add a caveat here that, you want to talk about conserving the Hilsa because it's also an iconic species. It talks about also protecting the river system in some sense. But when we really talk about conservation, those facts don't get so much attention as just the productivity numbers. It's about what comes on the landing stations and how much fish is produced by the state. And then bans become an easy answer for a top-down approach to regulate catch. And often the receiving end of that is a fisher folk, is that they are not able to fish. And then you suddenly think about what will happen to them when you ban the fish. And there were no consultations that happened with communities, either about the ban or what those implications would be. And it was almost like an afterthought that they started talking about alternative livelihoods. But what is alternative livelihoods in this context? And I mean, West Bengal just, ad verbatim added things like, so Bangladesh has a system of 6 Hilsa sanctuaries where they really focus on how they've identified them through scientific processes, where they see that the maximum amount of breeding happens in those pockets, and hence they have been declared sanctuaries. In India, they just remain on paper. There's no understanding of what does that mean to be translated on the ground, and it hasn't been translated on the ground, so to say. So that's where things stand in terms of what is happening. And to just say a little bit more about, therefore, where do we see this going? And this is a much complex issue, like Sebastian was mentioning, that we can keep talking about that the fishers have there is a need to focus on there. And here the livelihood is not just the fishing livelihood, it's an entire livelihood system on which so many different parts of the system, so many different people are engaged in. And therefore it's important to build in a very strong community participation into the decision making process. And only when we recognize the tenurial rights of the community to the river, only then you can start engaging in a process of co-management of these river systems through communities, because they are the ones who are most local to that, and they are the ones who will have the greatest stakes in it. But often they are completely erased and invisibilized in the policy framework, in the policy narratives that we have. Then the other issue is that when we are talking about research on what is happening, what really is impacting the Hilsa numbers, or for that matter, any of the fish numbers in the river, we only are making fishing as that problematic issue. But what is happening because of inland waterways? What is happening because of the flows that are getting affected? What is happening because there are dams upstream? Now, I mean, it's quite well known, and I mean, Bibha and Smita did mention about it, that the Farakka dam, the Farakka barrage is one of the reasons which was a death knell for the inland fisheries up north of the Farakka. And that's true. And it's true for below the Farakka as well, in different parts, as to what is happening to that entire system. The other aspect is the consumer is so removed from where your resource is coming from. And it's important to also build on that, because we live in a liberalized economy where consumption is the thing and the economy runs on consumption. But what can it be? Sustainable consumption? Can there be awareness around what is responsibly harvested Hilsa all about? And can we talk about how can we stem consumption also and look at other modes of ensuring that, because traditionally Hilsa was not consumed throughout the year. Hilsa was consumed only for a very short period of time. And coming back to that is this whole question of, can we look at the fish in a larger ecosystem, which again, Sebastian pointed out how the forest is linked to the river, is linked to the seas, and how the entire system, so it has to be looking beyond the local ecological context to the larger systemic context in which we must talk about fisheries management. And with that, I'd also like to, this is my last slide, where I'm trying to talk a little bit about what does transboundary rivers, fish and fishers really have in common, and where do we learn from. And in my own research, where we were trying to develop a sort of a grassroots diplomacy around fish and fishers, we were looking at how the Indian counterparts on the West Bengal side could learn from what was happening in the Bangladesh side, and therefore have a more informed understanding of what was going on and how we can all be involved in that process. Similarly, there can be aspects around database management, around identifying those common research agendas. For example, it is a very simple thing that comes to my mind, that Bangladesh started its ban in 2003, which has resulted in increase in numbers, almost tripling the numbers from where it was today. I mean, from where it was in 2003. But we don't see the same change in India. It's not like they have stopped the fish from coming to India. But is there something else that's happening? Is that it is moving onto the Meghna system and not coming into the Hooghly system because the Hooghly system is more polluted, or the Hooghly system is more silted? We don't know those answers. And it's important that that space be opened up for common research agendas to be created to, therefore, create a common understanding of what is happening to our resource overall, and therefore look at how we can not just protect the fish, but the ecosystem and the livelihoods that depend on it. I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sushmita. That was a lovely presentation. And thank you for bringing the upstream issues and also the transboundary. So now I will request my co-moderator, Sebastian Matthew, to please take over and open the discussion for Q&A. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I think that the very fascinating presentations. Really, I think they have captured all the elements of what needs to be done. But then I think, as Joy also mentioned at the beginning, how do we kind of bring a coherent approach to bringing people back into the rivers? And I think it's very clear from Smita's presentation that the dispossession of fishing communities from the rivers it's a colonial kind of experience, and which continues even 74 years after independence. It's really a shame that we are unable to make our fishers, inland fishers, the icons. The communities and inland fishers, the icons of the health of our rivers. So I think if Hilsa can be iconic for one country, because for various reasons, cultural reasons and contribution to GDP, economic reasons, why not invest in seeing these same people as the iconic to talk about the health of our rivers? And I think that perhaps requires a huge shift in mindset to move away from all kinds of fragmentation, to recognize the role of tribal communities, the women in aquatic medium, then what earlier referred to as the Nilkant referred to it as the aquatic livelihood. Not only fish, you have to talk about the plants that grow in the rivers. So therefore, the water body can feed many more people, and water bodies employing a very large number of people, perhaps undercounted in present statistics. So these are important, and this requires a very huge mind shift, I think, in looking at the ecological aspects. And then again, as somebody referred to, I think the ecosystem perspective. I think ecosystem perspective has two elements. One is the ecological well-being, and the other is the social well-being. So therefore, we have to see the social well-being and ecological well-being coming together. I think that's where the point that Joy also mentioned at the beginning, that we have to put these two hands together: environmental movement to save rivers and the social movement to save livelihoods. They have to come together and clap together to save our rivers. So I think the elements are there. There is struggles of communities, illiterate women taking over marketing in Bihar, and or the tribal community trying to build a cooperative when they get dispersed from the water body. I think there are so many of these very small kind of heroic efforts, initiatives are there, but I think these have to be kind of linked together. So if you have a kind of a coherent action across the country, I'm saying don't compartmentalize that into West Bengal or Bihar or UP. We need a national perspective on rivers, and peninsular India and Himalayan India are very important to integrate the two. And then I think there is a tremendous need for raising awareness. I think a lot of these issues that we talk about rivers are not known to the people, because I think as the last speaker spoke, Sushmita, right? I think Sushmita spoke. The consumer awareness is very important, and maybe we can think in terms of eco-labeling schemes, or some. I've seen the French fishermen, for example, when they catch local production, they have a label on the can saying that this is caught by Mr. So-and-so, processed by Miss So-and-so in this particular method. This technique is so many years old. So therefore, the traditional rights, all those things are articulated. So I think a combination of what community participation, tenure rights, co-management can strengthen the social element of livelihood, and communities can come together. And this have to be definitely supported by national policies and legislation. I think we need very important. And unfortunately, this is a state subject right now, the fisheries. And I think, but then interstate rivers are seen as a union subject. But we need to see whether all rivers, I mean, the way forest was like in the beginning, and then they became a concurrent list. I think even fisheries and rivers also have to move into a concurrent list so that we can develop a national perspective, and states become an implementation arm of a larger imagination. In fact, already we can see that signs in the new National Marine Fisheries, Indian Marine Fisheries Bill. Although marine fisheries also are in the state list. Now the new draft, if you can read it online, of the Ministry of Fisheries, Agriculture, Fisheries, Animal Husbandry and Dairying, they talk about how there will be a national legislation for the EEZ, and the state will be the implementation agency, although the state doesn't have any kind of jurisdictional right to the EEZ. So this is interesting that there is already a move in that direction in the marine fisheries. Maybe one can extrapolate that into, or interpolate that into the inland sector, and again this coherence that we talk about: marine, inland, river, estuarine, mountains. And last but not the least, I mean, what is the name for Mount Everest in Nepal? Mount Everest is called Sagarmatha, although Nepal is far away from the ocean. So you can see that there is an unconscious mindset of people. This interconnectedness is already reflected, and we need to give life to that interconnectedness by bringing inland marine all together, ecological and social aspects together. Thank you. That's my take on your excellent presentations. Thank
you. I suggest, since we have about 5 minutes left, anybody has any burning questions to ask any of the panelists, maybe we can spend another 5 minutes and wind up. Is that okay, Sebastian?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So we can just put it onto the floor, saying that in case anybody has a question, they can shoot. Otherwise, we can wind up. Yeah.
Yeah. Any questions you can put in the question and answer if you feel like, or you can ask. I mean, if people have access to speaking, then maybe they can ask directly as well. Yeah. So the floor is open for questions. Yeah, for 5 minutes.
If anyone wishes to speak, they can just raise their hand and then I'll enable audio for them. Or we can also maybe take up, for the sake of those who've not seen the Q&A box, the questions that were posted in the Q&A box. Maybe we can read those out for the benefit of those also watching the recording.
Okay, I'll take it forward. There was a question given to Joy saying that he's answered it, but probably you can speak to the larger audience. Like one of the slides showed a large rise in the yield of inland fisheries in the last 3 or 4 decades. So does it indicate that the river by and large is in good health, was the question. So probably you can.
No, I had responded to Paridoshji saying that what I showed was that, though there is this increase in the, what you call the inland fisheries, the bulk of it comes from not actually traditional, what you call capture fisheries, but comes from the, what you call the culture or the aquaculture type of thing, or even reservoir based type of stuff. So that's what I have responded. I think that's fine. Unless otherwise other panelists want to add something to it, that's fine with me.
I mean, I'll just add to Joy, you're absolutely bang on that answer. But also the way the inland fisheries policy, I mean, the way the national fisheries policy is rolling out on the ground, the focus has been on culture fisheries over capture fisheries. And that is the problem. There's a general bias within the fishing bureaucracy where the focus is on aquaculture over capture fisheries, and that's been referred to by both Bibah and Smita as well in their discussions, that how that is impacting livelihoods, and that's an important question because that directly links to the health of the river, which is in question. And the moment we are talking about aquaculture, there are issues of what is happening in aquaculture and the input driven perspective in aquaculture, how is that impacting the ecosystem overall? Is there then the invasives are moving from these aquaculture systems into the open systems, and is that impacting populations of capture fisheries? And those are things that we need to really, I mean, of course, under the PM Matsya Yojana, there's a huge focus on restocking of rivers through ranching, through fish ranching. And as much as there is some value to that, I'm still very cynical and I will be very careful about saying that that is the way to, promote restocking of rivers, because that's not going to sustain beyond a point. I mean, there are larger questions that need to be addressed before you can sustain that.
Yeah, I think that also raises the issue of the biodiversity in rivers, because we did a workshop some years ago on small indigenous freshwater fish species with Sifri in Barakpur. And where it was very interesting. There's so many species which are very important in nutrition, like mola in Bangladesh, in West Bengal, good for lactating mothers. There are several other species which are not even properly documented. We don't even have looked into what kind of biodiversity exists and how does it kind of tie with our own culture, the nutritional culture, the culinary culture. I think these are important dimension. And then if these can be revived, I think there is a noon meal feeding program in Orissa, which World Fish Center introduced.
Yes.
So maybe in this kind of program, you can promote, high nutrition, small indigenous species, not exotic species, which are, invading our waters.
Not exotic, not input
intensive
focused,
and
intensive.
And then I think if some balance also can be sought, because from a livelihood point of view, I think we need to protect rivers and water bodies, water courses. I mean, that's the right term to use perhaps. And that definitely will help to keep livelihoods intact, and maybe this certain kind of migration, the distress migration that happens because of lack of opportunity can be also reversed. So therefore, there are a lot of social reasons why there should be an investment in traditional ways of looking at rivers, weaving into the culture, into the genetic and biodiversity of the area, and then keep that as our heritage. This is our heritage, and this heritage should not be eroded the way the colonizers did it, without any concern for us. But I think when we citizens are ruling ourselves as a republic, we need to, I think, have the right perspective on our own resources and our relationship with those resources. So that we can safely talk about intergenerational equity as our kind of motive.
I had a follow-up question, because this session is talking about changing political economy. When we look at marine fisheries and the kind of communities, close-knit communities or strengths that marine fisheries has as unions or as platforms, we don't see something similar for inland fisheries. Could the panelists maybe talk a bit about, is it even feasible to think about that happening, or what are the factors that are limiting that from happening?
Yeah, maybe Nilkant can talk about the fishermen's, kind of.
We as Matthew Sebastian we have already started with the process, national level peace forums platform a few years ago. But the challenge comes in, like they are, as I said in my point also, different state, different community has different tradition. They are different priority, even the catch, the challenges, and the kind of leverage they need from the resources. Even the traditions are very different. Like as I said, in the Gadchiroli, even when people go to harvest in river, there is a proper puja and function people do. But there are many places in Jharkhand we have seen in the early 2000 where people go and they use the dynamite and some kind of all those, just to harvest the fishes. So there is not a uniformity in terms of the challenges and the opportunity in this riverine and reservoir fishery. So that's the challenge, which is very difficult to as a one standard template, as a one time of standard demand note to the government, that doesn't fulfill the aspiration of different communities in that sector. So that's the limiting thing. But if we go for the more micro level platforms where it is all integrated to a macro level, yeah, then that's an opportunity.
Has Smita and Bibah has any comment on this? Because what Siddharth asked, or any other comments? As
Regarding Siddharth, do you have any questions related to my presentation or any type of question?
I don't know. We can. I don't know. Sarita and Sebastian, what do you say?
I think Sushmita had her hand raised
Yeah. Okay.
for that question.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, Siddharth, I mean, that's an interesting question. And that again relates to how productive the system is, and therefore the need for collectivization in some sense. So in the marine context, because there is some amount of resource, there's some amount of income coming out of it, and there is a political will within the community that they want to do something and they organize themselves, and that has happened. But in the inland, at least in West Bengal, that has completely broken down simply because it's no more a viable livelihood source. It's part of a system, it's part of a larger livelihood system where you still do some amount of subsistence fishing, but it's still not part of a resource system that is the key thing. And that is where unionizing them or collectivizing them has become a huge concern, because the sense of community, that who are we and how we can come together, has also got eroded over time. I mean, if you look back at what has happened, say, when Rani Rashmoni was a queen in that area, and when the fishers wanted to fish and the Britishers didn't want them because they wanted the boats to ply, it was Rani Rashmoni who came to their rescue to say that the fishing rights will be taken care of. So it's how the community has been alienated from the resource, and that is where, to safeguard the resource, this alienation has to be stopped. And I mean, like Sebastian mentioned about Dokhin Bongo Matsyajivi Forum, which is again working a lot more in the estuarine and the marine zone, and is trying to revive a lot of stuff in the riverine, in the upper reaches of Hooghly, but has not succeeded as much because of this complete alienation from the resource. It's like a fisherman in Bolagod or in Chanalchor will be fishing the whole day and probably get one hilsa during the peak season. But, that will fetch that family either 600 rupees, depending on the fish, anything from 600 to 1,000 rupees. And that's huge amount of money for just one fish. And that's where it's important. But it's because the river has no other fishes available, this is where the thing happens. And that's where the problems start arising. And those are the things, and that's where we are saying that how important, therefore, are community narratives to managing rivers, because that's what is missing today. I mean, the techno-bureaucratic engagement with the river has got the people off the river. And that is where the problems lie, I feel.
Also, I think, Sushmita, yeah, the Sustainable Development Goals, for example, India is reporting, there is voluntary national review.
Yes.
I think we should also make sure that there is reporting on SDG 6, for example, sustainable management of water.
6.4 especially.
Integrated water resource management. Then 6.6 about
6 also,
about the support and strengthen participation of local communities. So I think these are again vehicles to be considered for further visibilizing these inland sector, and then contribution to food security, nutritional security, like poverty alleviation, eradication, all those things. So therefore, I think there are some interesting kind of tools out there which we should also try to use nationally to kind of strengthen. Yeah,
absolutely.
Bibha, do you have? Yes, raise your hand. Yeah.
Just I want to say about the river life. Actually, healthy river. What is the meaning of healthy river? If you will study about the river and their ecosystem, it is not a single day program. it has taken lots of years, and the ecosystem has been built in different time period, different place from different places and from different type of resources. So the river bed is completely the bed of nutritional bed. Actually, it is a nutritional bed, and there at the adjacent area there is a nursery bed of the fishes. So the nutritional bed is completely disturbed by the heavy siltation, soil erosion, different type of other activities, low water due to the high temperature and less rainfall. These type of activities has completely disturbed the nursery bed and the nutritional bed. So to build up the these area, it will take long time. Now the heavy siltation came from the different tributaries from the other side, and they carry different type of chemical pesticides, chemical fertilizers, different type of soil from their adjacent areas. So these things should be stopped. So how to control these things? It will take a master plan for at the national level, not the state level, because there are different type of tributaries mixed to the main rivers, and they disturbed all the main rivers too. And some of the input, the like contamination of the pesticides or different type of chemicals came from the different tributaries too. So to maintain the healthy system of river, we have to restore the habitation and habitat. The habitat restoration program is also a very high level task. So India needs a huge policy. First, habitat restoration, and check out the different type of heavy siltation or soil erosion, control of pollution, control of pesticides and chemical fertilizers. Different type of different areas should be covered by the vegetation, not by the agriculture practices, because agriculture practices have to be changed there also, to use the manures or the organic farming also. So they have in the near about. But if we will take the afforestation program in the river bank area, that will also control some of the systems to check the soil erosion. There needs to stone input the near about the area. So many things. So if the river water and the river ecosystem will be strengthened, or they will be healthy, it will automatically or naturally will create a fish population, and it will also help to fisher person. So I think there is a need of some of the policy, not only for the fishes, but for the healthy ecosystem, so that the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change has developed the river life management system, and they are giving the different type of training program to the people living in the near about the river side. I think this will be best from.
Yes, thank you, Bibah, so much. Smita, I would just like to rather ask you, like, in terms of way forward, if you want to revive the riverine fishing, what could be done? I mean, just if you could just summarize quickly something. Yeah.
Well, I concluded with what I had in mind about, you know, the involving the women in programs, and especially in cooperatives and so on, because I really feel there's a lot to be done in terms of reviving these water bodies that are sort of eclipsed, or, you know, that have dried up and so on. I think that has a good potential there.
Yeah, also, I think taking on what Bibah had spoken, I think nobody proposes a riparian regulation zone. We have a coastal regulation zone. Why not, the riverbanks also have a certain set of measures to regulate activities, then to afforestation, again, which ideal for the kind of riverine ecology we have. I mean, the riparian ecology we have. I think a riparian regulation zone also perhaps should be looked into, as one of the options. Yeah, which I think I never heard anybody talking about it. I just thought of it now when you.
Sebastian, I know there is something in some of the states, some type of riverine, riparian regulation. There's zoning and things, but that's all getting diluted under this whole economic onslaught.
Yes.
Everybody is now, getting away with that. So there are some struggles around it in some of the states and things to do this. But what you said is absolutely right. Yeah.
Yeah. So thank you everyone for your valuable inputs, and I'm sure we'll surely include this in uploaded on the YouTube, so those who have missed the webinar can see this. So thank you each and every panelist for giving your valuable time, and of course Sebastian for moderating the session. There's one quick announcement that next Saturday, that is 27th of November, will be the final session of the India River Week. So please send it across even your contacts and spread the word that we'll be talking about the governance and the policies and how whatever so far we've covered in all these 4 sessions, how we can bring it forward. So so this is what the last session is all about, and I'll stop here now. So thank you, Siddharth, Neha, for organizing, for being at the back and organizing this so well. Yes.